G'day folks, welcome to this overview and example of play of Maori Wars, the New Zealand Land Wars 1845 to 1872. This is designed by John Poniske, art by Nils Johansson, and it's published by Legion Wargames in 2018. This is in effect an I go, you go war game where players are striving to secure victory points by destroying their opponent's unit types, basically forts, villages and settlements and so forth, and destroying their forces in the process. All units have a strength of 1, and the number printed on the unit indicates how far they can move, which is very important. Combat is fairly straightforward. You compare the strength of the attacker, typically the number of their pieces, against the strength of the defender, again typically the number of their pieces modified by forts and pars, and you determine if the attacker is the lesser force, equal force, or greater force. Then you just roll a d6 on the corresponding column to determine the outcome, and again there are some combat modifiers that apply. Now, complementing all this, you have raids taking place. You have the implementation of battle dispatch chits, which kind of modify or create sort of events surrounding battles, and these are drawn by the defender prior to combat taking place. You have the construction and improvement of your villages and settlements and so forth throughout the course of the game. Let's have a close look at the components. The game also comes with several of these charts. You can see here the terrain effects chart and sequence of play. This is the Battle Dispatches Report chart. You draw one of these, the defender draws one of these in every combat, and it just changes the situation slightly, sometimes quite significantly. I'll show you how this works in just a moment. Then there's the Alliance Negotiations table. You roll this during the Alliance phase to try to draw neutral groups over to your side. And then, then there's the bombardment table down the bottom when you have artillery or gunboats. And then the pretty straightforward combat results table, D6 based table with some modifiers for terrain and circumstances. And then a summary of the various ways you can gain victory points. This is the key to winning the game. These are all single-sided charts, so it's nice. You don't have to sort of flip around to see what side. It's all just very straightforward. And here we have the rulebook. It's a 20-page rulebook, nice glossy paper. There is an introduction, game basics, sequence of play, summary of the different types of forces involved, and then the rules really start here. This is where you begin to understand the game. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages of rules, and then you get into the scenarios, and there are about 11 pages of scenarios. So fairly easy to grasp the basics. The problem is with any game that tries to condense rules into just 5 pages, there are going to be a lot of gaps and uncertainties. And this is unfortunately the case here. Don't get me wrong, fascinating game. Still, the rules are easy, but there's a lot that isn't explained here, particularly around and forts and what they do. In short, from what I can grasp from the FAQ and sort of clarifications, pars add 1 to the defense of an area, and they're only used in defense. They don't add to the kind of a counterattack. It makes sense thematically. The same with forts, but they add +2 to the defense of an area. Can only be used when working out the defensive strength. However, a par or a fort left alone can engage in sort of a small counter attack. Any defending unoccupied fort or par may do this as well. So the simple point of the strength of the par and the forts is never quite made explicit. And I have one other very minor niggle, and it is that Nils Johansson has done an outstanding job on this map. It is one of the most beautiful map designs. It is incredibly detailed and vibrant. It is one of those maps that you could frame. The whole art surrounding the map, this sort of mid-19th century style of font and structure, it feels pulled straight out of a sort of 1840s, 1850s map. Just the art, style, structure, everything about it is beautiful. It feels very thematic and historic. Why is this a concern? Because when you get to areas like this, it can be really hard to see the map. Such high stacks of units, and the coastline is super important. Let me just move these units out of the way to show you what's going on here. And you'll notice that this is in fact a little peninsula up here, and that these units here can't attack across here, and these units here can't move across the bay. It is hard to notice these kind of minor details at a glance. So yeah, this beautiful map and those details, these incredible, and if you look closely, you can see Poor Knight's Sandy, Blood Bay, I think that may be, all these kind of the details of the locations and the bays and peninsulas and so forth. So I'm covered up. Look, it's such a minor quibble, reflecting my appreciation for the beautiful map design. So what am I saying here? What am I whinging about? I guess it would have been nice to see the map twice the size, where we can still have these units on the map, but be able to appreciate the map detail in the background. This is about a 22 by 34 inch map. It'd be nice if there was two maps side by side and the hexes were larger. So I'm asking for more of this beautiful map design, more space to be able to appreciate these details. So the scenario I'm running through is the first one listed in the book, Honoheker's Challenge, the Flagstaff War from 1845 to 1846. And it begins set up like this. Just to give you an idea of what we're looking at here, this is the far northwestern part of the northern island of New Zealand, referred to here as the province of Auckland. We have most of the Maori forces set up. These are the black units in the far north. They have a few settlements and pa. To the kind of north of them, the kind of grey-ish units, these are the Queenites. These are the Maori who are loyal to the British and who fight alongside the British. British forces are of several types. You have the blue militia, these are relatively weak. You have the red infantry, these are relatively strong. Then you also have some naval forces mixed in. They also have some settlements and forts. You can see one settlement there just to the southwest of Auckland. There is a slightly variable setup, but I didn't really think too much about this. I basically just placed a few settlements down on the board. There are also two neutral villages. There's one in the centre there, you can see the neutral marker, and there's one up in the top surrounded by all those other units, and they also have two neutral units with them and a neutral village. Those neutral forces will play an important role in the coming conflict, particularly those ones up in the north. The first step of the sequence of play is the reinforcement phase. Players sometimes get automatic reinforcements, so they secure these on the game turn track and can place these. The Maori don't get any in the first turn, but in addition to those automatic reinforcements, they can also retrieve one unit from the reinforcement box. The Maori have one there, so they retrieve one of those units and can place it in one of their villages in the far north. Then we go to the movement phase, and again, the numbers on the units indicate how far they can move, so the Maori can kind of move around 4 spaces, keeping in mind there are different terrain costs. So they decide to shuffle their forces around to do several things. First of all, they really want to threaten the British up in the top right. They want to use their leader to try to ally with this neutral group in the centre. They want to put immediate pressure on the Queenites in the top left, And hopefully their long-term goal is to surround that Queenite leader there, Nene, in the centre, and force him to retreat and eliminate him, hopefully, through a lack of a retreat path. That's their kind of broader plan here. So with movement done, you move to the rally phase. This is where Maori leaders may attempt to rally disrupted units. There aren't any in the first turn, so we go straight to the alliance phase. This is where your leaders can attempt a die roll on the alliance negotiation table to try to bring these neutral groups to your side. As it happened, we rolled a 6 here, so this neutral group ally with us, and we replace all their neutral units with Maori units, and now on our side and will fight alongside us. This is great because the next step in the sequence of play is the combat sequence, and we have several combats planned here. First, we have 2 Maori units up in the top left attempt to attack an isolated Queenite unit in a village. Now, as part of the sequence of play for combat, defenders can attempt to evade. It's pretty hard. Usually units need a 4+ or 5+. The Queenites need a 5 or 6. Fortunately for them, they rolled a 5 and they withdraw or evade to the north. They figure they'd rather fight on better terms. They're 2 versus 1. They're outnumbered, and so they evade. Unfortunately, they do leave behind one of their villages, and the Maori can now move in, destroy that village, and secure their first victory point. Again, this is a core part of the game. This is really what they're focusing on, destroying those enemy structures and so forth. The second combat is now they've surrounded Nene and the Queenites in the centre. They would like to try to force his retreat. They also want to conserve some forces for an attack on the British. So we now have 3 Maori units attacking against, I think there's just 1 Queenite unit there, plus their pa. Now they have nowhere to evade to, so they have to fight. The first thing they do is they draw a battle dispatch chit, and they draw effective ambush. They can conduct an immediate raid on the main map. Now, as it turns out, they don't have any raiders in this box, so we ignore this. We move to the bombardment step. There's no bombarding units, there's no cavalry, so we go to the defensive counter attack. This is where the defenders get to pick 1 hex where the attackers are coming from and attack them first. So the Queenites pick that 1 attacking Maori unit. They are on equal odds, 1 versus 1. So they roll a 4, and the result is 1d. So one of these attacking units are disrupted. The attackers now get their roll, but because of this occupied pa, there's a negative dice roll modifier, and the net result of this is no effect. So the Maori shift their attention to the British up in the top right. Again, the British aren't evading here. They draw a battle dispatch counter, and they get atrocities. If the British draw this, they upgrade 2 settlements to forts with no VP penalty. This is a very bad outcome for the Maori. They're trying to attack these weak settlements in the isolated British. All of a sudden, the British have upgraded their 2 settlements in this area to forts, giving them a very strong defensive benefit. Now the British get to do their counterattack first. They again target the weaker of these attacking Maori, so they're the greater force. They roll a 2, which is a 1d, or the Maori have 1 disrupted result, which could place on one of their units. The Maori then counterattack, and unfortunately they roll pretty poorly, and again for no effect. A disappointing start on this first turn for the Maori player. We then go to the Bush Raider phase, and there are units that set up in this Bush Raider box, and it's quite versatile here. There's a few different things they can do. They can just stay here and take no action. They can move to adjacent territories if you're playing a larger scenario. As it is, this is just a 1 region scenario. They can leave this box and raid sort of isolated enemy units on the map, but at present there aren't too many, so I'm not going to worry about that. They can attempt to raid enemy units that occupy the same territory in the bush map, or they can leave this box and enter the main map. Now, because of their failure to sort of attack, and because this is a really focused scenario, I've made that decision to pursue the last one here. So I'm taking these units out of this box and placing them effectively to reinforce some of these areas on the map. And finally, the Maori player takes their construction phase. This is where they can build a new village, or they can upgrade a village to a pa. And because things aren't going too well right now, they decide to upgrade a village to a pa. It gives them a bit more defensive benefit if the British and Queenites decide to counterattack. We then go to the attrition phase, and each structure will support up to 3 Maori units. So they're fine here. There's a lot of villages and pa in this area, enough to support their units, so they're okay. That's the end of the first turn for the Maori player. We then move to the British, and they again start this sequence of play at the top. A key difference for the British, of course, is that they have some automatic reinforcements coming on. They arrive at Auckland down in the south. There's a big stack now here. They also get 1 unit from the reinforcement box, also placed down here in Auckland. During the movement phase, the British player decides to use their gunboat to ferry 2 of these units up to the north to reinforce this sort of area under siege. Meanwhile, some of their remaining infantry start to march north overland, bringing up some artillery, leaving some militia and infantry behind, just to hold some of those southern settlements. Now, because the British have now moved a leader adjacent to those neutral forces, they get to roll on the alliance negotiations table during the alliance phase. I should also say there's a rally phase. There are no disrupted British. So the alliance phase, they roll a 4. Unfortunately, the British leader is stacked with units, so they don't get that +1 bonus. And their alliance attempts have no effect. So now we proceed to the British combat phase, and this time it's the Queenites' turn to have some revenge. And the 2 Queenites up in the north decide to pick on that Maori group just to their southwest, isolated. The Maori, of course, can also retreat, and they also succeed, and they again use this evasion to build some bigger stacks with their allies. The British over in the east also decide to counterattack, and they target the 2 Maori units in the southeast. The Maori, of course, get they're the defenders, so they get to draw a chit first, and they send in the Marines. Now, the Maori don't have Marines, so we treat this as effectively no effect. Now, I was uncertain about this, so if you think, normally the BD chits apply to the defenders. If I'm wrong here, let me know. Perhaps it is the British who, in fact, should have the Marines. So the Maori get their counterattack first. They roll a 4. They're the lesser force, so the result is 1D, and we have 1 disrupted British unit. The British in attack, they are the greater force, but they only roll a 2. Which is also a 1D result. So the battle is pretty balanced. 1 disrupted Maori unit, 1 disrupted British unit. And that's about it for the British. They don't want to do any more attacks. So with their combat phase over, there's the Bush Raider phase. They have no Bush Raiders. They can move to construction. They upgrade a village to a pa. And then there's attrition, and they're all okay there. So that's the end of the first turn after both the Maori and the British player turns. So as you may have a sense of, this is a pretty quick playing game. It's I go, you go. This is a small focus scenario, so things move pretty quickly. There are only a small number of combats, but you can get a sense of how this all plays out. It's fairly straightforward. As I mentioned, there are a few uncertainties around certain events, and the pa and the forts and so forth. A lot of this has been cleared up by the designer online. He is very active in supporting the game. So check it out. This is Maori Wars by Legion Games.